in. At the start of this, I said, when you only get to see one portion of someone's life, the moment of triumph, you make the assumption often, and I often did this, that the journey leading up to that was easy, was consistent, it was super simple. That the complexity that you and I have to deal with, they didn't have to deal with. I thank God so much that He wrote Joseph's story into the Bible. I thank Him so much because it shows me that it's the moments where there is no limelight, where there is no prominence, where there is no influence, is the moment that makes you. God's plan for you isn't to use you, it's to make you. And through making you, He uses you for the purpose that He has planned for you and others. Through this journey of Joseph, we see that there are principles that you and I can take on board to live our life, so that in the preparation or in the circumstance or in the difficulty that we can find ourselves in, we have principles that we can follow to allow us to get through them. So here's principle number 1. Joseph knew how to persevere in adversity. His life was filled with hardship. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. He was falsely accused. He was imprisoned. Yet he never gave up. Perseverance in adversity is a key principle in Joseph's story. When he was sold, I promise you that he would have felt betrayed. He would have felt lonely. He would have felt in despair. He would have felt overwhelmed. He would have felt bitterness, and he would have felt resentment. He could have let all of those feelings, he could have let all of those things that happened to him be the definition of who he was. He could have let his circumstance define him. But he did not. He chose to work diligently despite his circumstance. Have you ever heard of the term that, hey, maybe you're behaving in a victim mentality? Maybe you're operating in a way that you're constantly the victim? Joseph would have had the supreme right to. We all have the right to. All of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, there are moments where you can say, hey, I didn't do this. I didn't deserve this. Why am I here? And you can choose to stay exactly where you are and take the circumstance and say the circumstance is unchangeable. Joseph found himself in prison. Joseph found himself as a slave. Yet I want you to see his response. He worked diligently, earning the favor of the slave master in prison, the prison master. His name was Potiphar. He worked diligently despite being in prison. Do you know what prison is? Prison's a place where you cannot get out of, where you feel like you cannot get out of. It is a place where you feel that there's boundary around you, there's restriction around you, there is darkness, there's limitation. Prison's a place where we can find ourselves in the mind. Prison's a place where we can find ourselves in our hearts. Maybe a circumstance has happened to you. Maybe a circumstance is happening to you right now, and you find yourself in a dark place where you feel like you cannot get out of it. You feel like it's a repetition of the same thing. 9 o'clock in the morning, we have to have breakfast. 10 o'clock in the morning, someone comes and makes me have exercise. At 12 o'clock in the morning, we do lunch. 2 o'clock in the morning, we've got to clean the bed. Your life in the afternoon, your life becomes a repetition and a limitation, and you feel like you have no choices of your own. The story of Joseph says that in those moments where you feel that way, you can still choose to be diligent. You can still choose to impress based on your discipline. You can still choose to work to the best you can despite the circumstance that your life finds yourself in. And in that, God will find opportunity for you to break and get release. I want to encourage you this morning, if you find yourself like Joseph in the prison, there is a moment that God has for you to break out. There is a moment that God has for you to get out of prison. But in it, He is doing something within you. I promise you that the prison moment in Joseph's life was preparing him to be able to handle the crises and operate in discipline when he had to administer for the entire nation. After getting out of prison, Joseph was then falsely accused. The false accusation came from Potiphar's wife. Potiphar accused him of doing some of the most despicable things you can think. He was accused, but accused falsely. Whilst he was there, he still did not. Whilst he was accused falsely and thrown back into prison, and whilst he was there, he still did not succumb to this idea that he was a victim. He still did not succumb to this idea that he was hopeless and in despair, and his despair was not going to be quenched. He continued to serve faithfully. And whilst he was in prison, there came a moment that God opened up where he was able to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh. His discipline impressed so much that he was able to understand what Pharaoh was going through in his dreams and was able to give wisdom in a moment that no one else was able to give wisdom. What it tells me is this: no matter where you find yourself, no matter what you're doing, you're able to persevere through it up until the moment that God breaks open the circumstance. And if you persevere through that adversity, God will open up the circumstance for you, and you will be ready for it. The New Testament tells us this. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Paul writes this, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This verse speaks to God's providence, a theme that is evident through Joseph's story. Joseph was the guy that saved hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people from dying from famine. Think about that. Think about that he had to be in prison to get the opportunity to speak to the king, to speak to Pharaoh. Think about that he had to be there and be ready to speak, to be able to do that. The hero who saved hundreds of thousands of people and nations had to be in prison to have the opportunity. That's a scary place to be, right? Because now you have to trust God that my slave pit, my prison, is appointed of Him. When Paul writes, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, that's a spear moment. In all of the circumstances you are in, God is working for good. For your good and for those around you. keep persevering. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Perseverance in you will build resilience. It will help you have the ability to bounce back. It will help you keep going no matter what. It will produce character within you. Adversity can shape your character. You see the worst of people and the best of people when there's adversity. But underneath all of the surface, you see who and what they're really made of. It will produce spiritual growth within you because it will force you to trust your circumstance or to trust God. If you choose to trust God in your circumstance, your spiritual growth, your journey with Him, the richness of your relationship with Him becomes more profound than it's ever been before. It will produce hope within you. And out of this hope, you will have a vision for the future. You will have something that carries you into the future.